Great. Just welcome to the CIAC meeting today. I'm just going to briefly cover a couple points that I talked about before we got started. So officially, we have a lot of material to cover today, and if we don't get through it all, I think we can continue it to another meeting because there's a lot of really good topics that we want to dive into. And this is a public meeting. We are not set up for public comment, other than we did receive some written public comment, and that will go into our record. And unless we have anything else, Carolyn, are you ready to go?
We are ready to go.
Okay, well, why don't we put up the agenda and then we can get started. Let's take a quick peek at it and make sure there isn't anything we want to tweak. Maybe if you, make it a little smaller so we can see the whole thing. Or scroll down, because I wanted to just cover really quickly the calendar. As you can see, we had a little bit of a change in the calendar this year. We don't have a topic identified for March 15th yet. So if we have a carryover, then that might be a possibility. And then we are going to take a break in April. And then in May, we're going to talk about climate and EV update again. And I would kind of highlight that we're still planning on for June 21st and September and October, we'll have in-person options. So hopefully we can all get together a couple times, 3 times a year, but still have the option for people to be remote. So let's get started.
Great, thank you. Sabrina, are you going to run the PowerPoint? Or did you want me to?
Ted or David, go ahead and share it on your end. I'm not sure that I have the current one, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you for your time this afternoon and for having us come back for this continued conversation about the important topic of cost estimating. I do want to let the committee know that we are absolutely committed to making meaningful changes, and I hope the progress that we share today demonstrates that commitment to change. We recognize we can do better. In addition, we do have several members of the ODOT cost estimating team on this call to listen in, because I think there's a learning opportunity and giving them some context as to where the recommendations or suggestions or even participating in the conversations for this afternoon. Just as a quick recap, we met with this committee about a year ago, February of 2022, to initiate discussions about cost estimating for our STIP. The duration for when initial cost estimates are developed to when projects go to bid, roughly 4 to 6 years, the market conditions at the time, as well as some of the tools and programs we developed to improve and manage cost estimating. We then met again in August to discuss major project cost estimating and how they take on a different form of cost estimating, as there's extensive planning, environmental, and public involvement work in advance of project delivery, the alternative delivery methods used to manage costs, and the higher risks due to scope variability for these larger projects. We then provided a high-level overview of the 4 major projects that ODOT is currently delivering. That is Oregon 217, the Bend North Corridor project, I-205 Abernathy, and the I-5 Rose Quarter projects. We recognize today that ODOT, our consultant partners, our construction contractors, and other DOTs across the country are continuing to take steps to improve and strengthen cost estimating for transportation projects in light of numerous factors affecting estimates. And we'll touch on that here at the end of the presentation as well. So within ODOT, we have instituted standards of practice that never existed before for cost estimating. And I would consider some of these standards of practice to be best practices. We've developed and implemented and refined tools and programs and established processes for quality, control, and transparency for ODOT project delivery. The caveat is that the scope of our cost estimating programs primarily covers our conventional STIP projects delivered by the regions. But we also recognize we have some mega projects and programs such as IBR, urban mobility, tolling, and ADA. And these cost estimating programs, tools, and resources are all available, and they are in fact being used. We have staff that are engaged with the urban mobility office, with the tolling program, and with the IBR as it relates to cost estimating. From a competency standpoint, prior to 2020, we only had 2 dedicated cost estimators in Salem, supporting the regions for delivery and supporting regions for developing estimates. Today, we're fortunate to have 4 dedicated cost estimators, many with construction experience. And we're finding that cost estimators with construction experience bring a different perspective, more the boots on the ground perspective than the engineers that really don't have that field experience. We've also formally designated cost estimators in each of the 5 regions. We've established a statewide cost estimating peer group comprising of 18 ODOT technical professionals. Now, the vision is to collaborate, improve competencies, and elevate cost estimating, not just as an extra task, but really as a discipline. The professionals in the regions are currently split function, meaning that they may be a roadway designer or a specification writer with the added task of doing cost estimating. And our hope is that at some point we'll have some more full-time dedicated cost estimators in the regions. So the table on the screen identifies just some of the programs and tools that we've instituted. And there are many more that we're currently evaluating. As I mentioned earlier, other DOTs are facing similar challenges and struggles with cost estimates. Through AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, North Carolina DOT recently sent out a survey across the country, gathering information about how DOTs develop budgets and what their cost estimating processes are. ODOT, as part of the AASHTO Technical Committee on Cost Estimating, provided responses, and we are going to follow up with North Carolina DOT to see the results of their survey.
When do you think the results are going to be available, David?
The survey just closed about a week ago, and so we will follow up to find out. We have yet to ping them, but we're going to work through AASHTO. I would also imagine that the results of the survey would be shared with that standing committee on cost estimating. And Joe Wolf, who's on the call here, he represents ODOT on that national committee.
I think this committee would be interested in seeing the results of that survey. If when you get it, you could forward that along.
Absolutely, we'll be sure to share that with the committee through Carolyn. To further sharing knowledge, ODOT has also joined a collaborative cost risk estimating management community comprised of other state DOTs, consultants, and the Association of General Contractors to discuss market risks and identify methods for improving cost estimating. What you don't see on the slide are some tools and programs that we're currently evaluating to really take cost estimating to the next level. Last month, we had 10 ODOT staff attend a 2-day in-person training through FHWA on probabilistic risk-based cost estimating. The training covered theory and application to how ODOT estimates costs, and also provided how to use tools for developing reliable estimates for cost and schedule. We're also exploring the development of an ODOT-centric regional cost, regional construction cost index also known as a CCI, which is similar to like a CPI. There is a national CCI, but what we want to do is establish an Oregon geographic CCI. And what a CCI is it's an indicator of the average cost movement over time of a fixed basket of goods and services that relate to the construction industry. The intent of the CCI is to measure the average changes of construction costs over time. It looks back. It also looks real time. However, we can use this information to forecast a CCI, which then can feed into our construction cost estimating processes. We expect this would be an investment of time and money, and we're currently evaluating whether it's something that we would like to pursue further. But what it will do is it will refine the information and will add additional factors that aren't currently captured through the national CCI that will help ODOT better forecast these indexes that we can then apply to say STIP projects or future planning projects. The third item that's not on this table is performance measures. We recognize that cost estimates are not static, but dynamic. However, the ODOT legacy IT systems we have today did not capture cost estimate progression. However, we're currently working on improvements to our systems, such as Ashtoware, that can capture cost estimates. The vision of that would be to come up with data systems that can improve transparency, accountability, and be able to provide a narrative for how cost estimates have changed over time. And so we had a list of projects. There was an article that was critical of ODOT and the estimates that we've developed for numerous projects over the last 2 decades. And we went back and reached out to the regions and the teams. Many are no longer with ODOT. And the general theme was many of those projects had scope changes, but it was difficult trying to track down the cost estimate progressions because we didn't have data systems that captured that. And it was trying to track down the area manager, the project manager. Some of them now work for consultants. And so it was very difficult. But the general theme was these projects took a long time to plan, design, develop, and then deliver. And there was substantive scope changes that took place with many of those projects. So for discussion, I've just covered some of the standards of practice that we've implemented and they're rapidly advancing. We're really trying to raise cost estimating to be a discipline. There's been some articles published recently that challenge the ODOT to be able to do better. And a question and some perspective from this committee on how can ODOT demonstrate project cost estimating competencies. We know that we want to improve the trust and credibility of the agency, whether it be with the commission, the legislature, or the public. And we also recognize it starts with the people.
So David, in terms of capturing the scope changes in your cost estimating, did I hear you say that you've got some new tools to do that, or is that something that you're still trying to incorporate?
So through our project delivery improvement initiative, we do have tools in place today. We have a database that captures our scoping documents. We now have formal charters that establish a baseline for a scope, schedule, and budget. And then we have formal change management processes that captures changes to projects, documents, whether there's a change to a scope, the schedule, or budget. And that is tracked throughout the delivery milestones. We have a 30% check-in point, and we reconcile to make sure, the scope is good, the schedule is good, and the budget is on track. And if there's something that's way off, we request that formal changes be made into our systems, and then we can roll those up. We have what we call a change management database, and we can run reports to see what are trends or themes we're seeing as relates to schedule or cost.
Maybe take the PowerPoint down so we can have our discussion. You can see everybody's hands more. I wasn't sure who was first, Joe or Paula, so.
Joe was.
No, Joe, go ahead.
Well, one thing, my name is Joe Wolf. I'm with the Project Controls Office and the Cost Estimating Program Manager. I think one thing to note too is that as we look at one of these articles, the scope has dramatically changed, but we're still fixated on a price that was given. For instance, Rose Quarter, we did a cost to complete. There was they weren't tunnels, considered tunnels, they were lids, right? And then they became tunnels essentially, and then we put buildings on top. And so the scope changes a lot with a lot of our other projects too. We have a way of tracking the scope change, if it's an elected change or an unelected change, and maybe David or Tamara could talk more of that, but sometimes we increase scope to a project which increases the budget to take advantage of why we're there, right? So if we pave another mile or we go another mile, we can add this culvert that's deficient, right? Which is dramatically going to increase that cost to the STIP, but you're going to get way more bang for your buck if you take care of it while all the contractors are there, type of a thing, just like if we decide to upgrade signs and guardrails. So I think that's important too. So how do we convey those elected scope, changes that actually benefit the road users and the taxpayers for us doing that? So that's a challenge. Another thing that maybe ask of this commission is what does cost estimating success ultimately look like? And it's a challenging one. Are we utilizing every dollar possible, meaning we have as many projects in development, we have aggressive pricing, but we're updating our STIP, we're doing all these things, or do we have super high contingencies on our projects to make sure we never end up in the papers, which ultimately means we don't have many projects in development. And then we're going to rapidly try and come up with a bunch of shelf programs or projects at the end of the STIP, because we got to spend that money or we give it away. So that's the balance, yin yang balance that maybe you guys could give us some insight of what maybe that looks like, and I'll be quiet.
Go ahead, Paula.
I think that one of the reasons why people are able to criticize a project that took 10, 11, 12, 20 years to develop is when costs are thrown out so early and ranges aren't given and clear scope. But my thought is, and I think everything you just mentioned, Joe, is absolutely right. And the only way to combat or to really understand what's going on with the project is somehow to keep the narrative, the story of what's changed as you go along. I think back on some of the projects that were scoped years and years ago that perhaps didn't consider some of the community impacts that we're now trying to solve, or your ADA, issues that you're trying to catch up to on some of these projects. And I'm wondering, this is more of a question, is there yet a tool, or could you create some kind of a dashboard that used your cost risk estimating risk register to really track where things are changing over time on every project, to document, okay, well, we found out we had more or higher costs on steel and concrete on this project, and it went from here to here. Ways to indicate where the changes came or what the added scope was in a way that at least you can go back and understand what happened, or you can keep track of how often do these kinds of things move into all of our projects, and are we missing something on the early development range of costs that we're giving? I think it's the documentation that just can probably never be good enough, but it's, if you track it as you go along, the better off you're going to be.
For me, that's kind of a three-part answer. One, David and Tamara could talk about the CMR database, the change management request database, where the teams are logging these scope changes or standards changes as reasons. AshtaWare project has a suite of programs that we have implemented, estimation as a part, where We now are loading our estimates into a database at DAP. Okay, so that's, before they were just kind of out in project-wise, right? So not
Yeah.
in a file structure. Now they're at DAP. Well, we really want to back it up to initiation. It's kind of our phase process, and then even take it into scoping. That doesn't really resolve planning yet, which we're getting a team together to talk about planning and how do we do planning level estimates, right? But once it's in estimation, we can track, we have reports that will track a phase of a project, right? So we could, it still doesn't tell the story, but from a number size, it tells a story. Hey, you added 30% more excavation on this project. Then I can ask the question, why, right? And we also track, and we've been tracking since the data is really good from about 2009 to current on what the project was at PS&E, plan, specs, and estimate. That's when the region submits it to go to bid, what the engineer's estimate was and what it was bid at. So we can trend off of that. We can see kind of cost and stuff. And we can now with AASHTO estimation, we have a way better tool set to analyze that down to the county level, to the region level, even to the project manager level, or if it was consultant delivered. So we can slice it a bunch of different ways. And we have a Power BI report that kind of shows just data of how our estimates are performing against the STIP.
And then the trick is to present something, a rolled up version of that in a way that the public can digest with an impression of, I said dashboard, but maybe it's something different. You can see how those projects over a long list of projects are performing. Are we all doing pretty well, or is it?
Yeah, and I think if you look at it from that level of that report I have, you'll see that we're managing our STIP pretty well.
Good.
We have anomalies, right? These big projects, which what I would say is we're lacking a better crystal ball at planning, I would say, maybe specifically. And for instance, just last week, I'll bring this up. I haven't talked to anybody, but we got asked by the legislator to update pricing to go from Salem to Albany and add a third lane on I-5 in each direction and replace the bridges. And we had 4 days to do it. Right. So luckily there was a planning study. ODOT had gone out and did a big planning study. It took about 3 years. They did a very thorough job. The consultant team did a very thorough job, had very good backup data, probably the best I had seen. But the pricing profile that was used on that study was pre-COVID, pre-Ukrainian war, pre all this escalation of inflation. And so the legislator already had a number because they've already seen the report. And in 4 days, we had to update it to our standards, what our assumptions were, what is the pricing look like. So that's kind of the pressure we get ourselves, or kind of the box we get ourselves painted in too, because ultimately we want to build these projects too. So it's tough, and we deployed a team, and we actually learned a lot from that process because we want to set this project up to be able to update in the future. What did we look at? So we have a whole document. Who was involved in the team? What did we look at? What contingency profiles did we run on the project? What did NEPA look like? What does right of way look like? We checked in with all the design disciplines that were on the team, internal and external, as well as we had an independent Tiger team that we assembled under, we called our project, a loosely project analysis group. And we put a document together. Now, time will tell if that project gets put into the system and they vote to fund it, right? And then ultimately what we suggested is that they fund just the PE. Let us get it developed, right? But I think what happens a lot is the project gets sold, but there's still all these things that need to really be worked out to really define the project. And so that's the tough part, because we don't have, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, and we don't have a team, an A team sitting over here at ODOT, just sitting here twiddling, waiting to deploy a ton of resources to figure out a complex problem. And this is another $2 billion size project in the whole thing. So those are the issues.
So Joe, I wonder, it sounds like where we have the biggest disconnect is when we're asked for a planning level estimate, which doesn't have all of the engineering analysis completed. And then the legislature or whatever funder decides, well, here's what you asked for, go build it. And I think that's what, that's how we got to where we are in the Rose Quarter. And it's never engineered adequately. So
Correct.
can we look back and see what the disconnect from a planning level estimate to construction? And if there's like a, it's always 60 or, 60% higher. I mean, so we could get a rough estimate.
I think our problem is that globally we work these things in silos when the request came in, and we need to get it outside of the silo.
Yeah.
For instance, this request came through the region, and the region said, hey, we want someone else this time. What I'm talking about is this instance, is we want some completely new team to kind of reevaluate everything that was looked at, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? So we applied different resources, came at it from a different angle, and I really documented what we did. The issue is still you're not going to know all the sideboards of a project until you get to about DAP, right? Because time is our worst enemy. Time from that planning level estimate to when it kicks off to DAP could be years. And Federal Highway comes out with a new technical document that changes all of the barrier standards, for instance. That happened to us recently, where you think, well, barrier, we have that everywhere, that's no problem. But it just tripled the cost of the barrier, right? That's a huge deal on our alignment.
Can I jump in for a second? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I'm just gonna try this out. It seems to me that you have a storytelling problem. And what I mean by that is all the things you're describing are reasonable. Like, that's why prices go up. Time passes, guidance changes, materials cost more, there's inflation, there's wars, all these unknowns, and we'll never have a perfect crystal ball. Like, that doesn't exist. And so we need to take our best guess. And I think that in doing that, I know what happens with the media and with politicians. Like you said, it was going to cost this much and now it's this much. What happened? I think that we need to do a better job at, as I like to say, like caveating the shit out of things and talking about how we're giving you a number. There are a lot of variables that are likely to change. They could change as much as X%. Here are some examples of how things have changed over time. And everything should have an asterisk on it so that you don't end up on the front page of the Oregonian looking like shit. Like, that's a terrible position for an agency to be in, and it makes you really risk averse, and that's not what you should be doing. And so when you say to me that things get developed in a silo, like, I'm not a technical person, but I do a lot of like government affairs and comms work. What terrifies me is that an estimate would come out of the engineering group and not go through like a political lens or a comms lens to make sure that other eyes that are going to be reading this and reporting on it are going to read it and understand what we're saying, in that there are all these variables. This number is going to change. Please don't take it to the bank. But when we're talking about order of magnitude, here's what we're talking about.
And that's what we did on this last one. None of us reported it to the legislator. It went to the comms team, and we provided a range, and we had a list of asterisks below the range. I think the problem is, though, on a couple recent examples, somebody still fixates on a number at the legislator and puts.
But there's literally nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
They're going to do that. But the best thing that we can do as an agency is really make sure that when the press comes calling, we're able to show them the document we presented to the legislature and say, you'll see here all of these variables that we said would likely change. And I think that, back to sort of tracking the variables that do change, it's interesting to think about how like guidance changes and that, triples the cost of barriers. I think that's a really interesting sort of example to provide to media or legislators as they ask questions, and say, it's like, it's out of our control. We're not you know, we're obviously in touch with the feds, but these guidance documents come out, we have to follow them, and it has serious budget implications for us. So I guess I would say like having some really tangible examples like that in your back pocket at all times is important.
Amber?
So I have a couple questions and I just want to pick up on what was just said. So one question I have is, to what extent are these handled through contingency? Second question is, and I really appreciate the fact that you now have increased the number of estimators that have construction experience. And this leads to the second question is, to what extent for your RFPs for the engineering estimates do you require estimators with construction experience as part of the engineering estimate? And then the last one is because, and I say that because I mean, I've been doing this for like 25 years, and I do think there is a significant difference between the way the engineers, the consulting engineering approaches estimating versus construction estimators. And then the second thing, and then the last thing is, I just want to echo what was just said. So I had a conversation, I don't know, probably a year or so ago with some folks within ODOT. And this entire conversation is about the juxtaposition between cost, schedule, and engagement with the community. And ODOT is under pressure now, and ODOT is listening as a result of external influences that has resulted in ODOT actually considering feedback in the way they build projects. And that has an effect on the scope. And so I agree that this is really a communications issue. And that was part of the reason why I really wanted to have this first conversation, so then we can actually have probably a longer conversation about positioning, because all of these issues are reasonable. And when I looked at the article specifically by Courtright, it's a lack of understanding about the various confluences that go into estimating as a result of COVID. Oregon has a workforce shortage that drives up costs. That affects materials. So as a result of the pandemic, there's buying and hoarding. There's disruptions in chain logistics, all resulting in cost escalations. And I just think we have to look at this from a communications perspective. Sorry, I asked two questions. I'll shut up now.
I can answer one piece of it, but I do want to point to Zach Davis. Zach Davis runs our risk programs here, and he can talk a little bit about the contingency. What I will say is that traditionally we haven't maybe applied enough contingency to planning level estimates, but this comes back to we have two different programs. Either one, we're going to maximize dollars and get as many projects into production as possible, knowing that these things and anomalies are going to come up and we'll have to adjust our STIP, prioritize our projects, or we're going to carry a ton of contingency, because if we carry a lot of contingency, that means we have less money to put to the pool. But Zach, I would like for you to talk on this matter if you could.
And Joe, you're asking me to speak on how we develop contingency and the purpose of it. Yeah, so contingency, the purpose of contingency is to provide a risk reserve. We've got a couple of different methodologies for developing that. At the basic level, when we've got straightforward projects, we use percentages that are based off of how projects have been delivered in the past. And as we scale up in project size and complexity, then we start turning on more robust efforts. The intermediate level would be to develop a risk register, quantify that risk, and then develop what's called expected value to build a strategic risk reserve. And the ultimate level that we'd like to roll out on a broader scale is using what's called probabilistic risk-based estimating. And this is a process that refines the cost estimate, diligently documents the risk, and looks to develop a complete risk profile. So gathering things like contractor risk. And then we integrate all that using a Monte Carlo simulation to develop what's called a probabilistic risk-based estimate.
So I do understand how the risk register works, but my point is that there are certain projects for which public engagement is going to increase that particular item on the risk register. That's good. That, in my opinion, would result in the need for a higher contingency than, say, 25%. So, I mean, I'm just throwing that out there for you to consider.
Amber, did you get both of your questions answered?
The second question was, to what extent do you use in RFPs around the engineering estimate, do you require an engineer with construction estimating experience? Sorry, thank you.
I don't know that. I know on our mega projects with our owners rep teams, I don't know if Megan or Amy wants to speak to this. We've been hiring professionals that have, as part of the RFP, demonstration on complex projects, cost estimating and constructability. I don't know if Megan or Amy, you want to speak to any of that?
Yeah, one thing I'll add in just on Rose Quarter, and everyone, Megan Channel, the Rose Quarter project director with ODOT, for the record. So for Rose Quarter, along with other projects in our mobility office, we're using a lot of independent estimating as well, which is where we have that opportunity to bring in kind of the contractor based approach. For Rose Quarter, I don't believe we had a specific requirement around, construction experience for our A&E estimator. I think that's I really like that, kind of that idea, Amber. And I think, again, the way that we've been managing that is bringing in independent estimators to help with that.
I don't know if it's Amira or Tamara. You've had your hand up for a long time.
Hi, thank you. I'm Tamara Clark, and I am the project development section manager, and I work directly with Joe Wolf and others that are on this call. I just wanted to go all the way back to Paula's statement that we could maybe create a dashboard that would include, say, the risk register and how those risks play out over time. I really like that idea, and I just wanted to thank her for it. But I also wanted to say that we have really spent quite a bit of time over the last few years identifying the data that we need to capture for cost estimating for projects, capturing the data, performing data governance to make sure that it's what we call clean data that's been quality controlled, placing that data in the data warehouse and being able to report out on it, all of which is a tremendous effort in and of itself to be able to provide that kind of information in a report. We're doing providing some wonderful support reports now for the regions, for the UMO and others that pull that data to meet their needs. But we haven't started to take a look at what reports we might provide for public consumption. And for public engagement. And so again, thank you, Paula, for that suggestion. And we'll go back and take a look at that and maybe add that to our work program for this year.
Just following up on that, I'm going to steal your turn, Mac, for a second. It sounds like we're starting to get some good data and good reports that tell the story. But what we aren't doing is taking that data and report and having people who tell stories help us tell the story. So you've got a bunch of great, smart engineers putting together a report, and then you give that to the Oregonian, and they're going to say, gee, thanks. They're not going to know how to deal with that story. So do we have a way to take this information and get it to our communications team? That's a.
And if I could just add to that and push back on articles and op-eds that aren't accurate, because I know that some of them create their own narrative that may or may not be based in data.
And I think it would be good for Mac to be able to weigh in at this point.
Go for it.
And if you're on mute, Mac, if you're talking.
Yeah, take your time and reboot. In the meantime, Amber's got her hand up.
Yeah, I agree with the communications issue here. So in my opinion, we can't compare WashDOT to ODOT. I mean, I appreciated why he did that, but the way WashDOT, my understanding is WashDOT has projects that are 8 million and below in-house. And so, I mean, they're entirely different agencies in the way they manage projects. It's just entirely different. So I understand why he did it. It was for effect, but this in part is a communications issue. I mean, I shouldn't say in part. This is 90% communications. And it's about telling the story in a way that the normal layperson will understand. And the other thing, I mean, even the legislature example that Joe provided, I thought was a very illustrative example, which is that again, is as a result of engagement with the legislature, now the scope has changed. Now it's resulting in an increased price. Same with Rose Quarter, which is you engage the Black community for which ODOT has not paid attention to, and now they're doing it right, and now it's going to cost money to create an innovative project. It's simple, but we need to tell the story so that the normal layperson can understand it.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, sweet. Thank you for the patience. Hey, just a couple things. Sharon, appreciated your comment around how do we connect this with our communications group. So very much so we can. And I think we're already taking some strides to do that, but I think making it more programmatic in terms of how we talk about this and how we get our story out there. So it's not about a specific one project. And Megan, since you're on, I think about the role the Rose Quarter team has in telling that story around just the Rose Quarter project itself. But how do we take this, I think Amber, to your point, and Paula and others on this call, how do we raise it up to an ODOT story, not about one project? I think we're primed and ready to take that next evolution. Now that we're, to the course of this discussion, talking about all the tools we've put in place so that we have a better understanding of our own abilities, data, and story, or information we can turn into a story. So we're not taking it as a one-off. I was reflecting during the course of this discussion, Amber, when you asked the contingency question, when I was raised up through this agency doing project management, right, everything was contingency based. There was really no risk register. We sort of talked about risk, but it didn't really equate to a cost estimate. And I think over the last 5 years, tremendous strides, as you've been hearing today, to get those tools in order. Technology is certainly helping us. All the things like bringing on Joe and Zach and their colleagues to help us create this discipline is allowing us, I think, to take the next step, which is now how do we turn this into a story that's compelling, that's understandable to the layperson. So I think we're positioned well to take that next step or next leap in this discussion. I do want to circle back one thing, Amber, you had mentioned, what are we doing around the construction-based focus with our consultants? And I think internally, we've had some discussion around as we move to a 70% design outsourcing model, largely from House Bill 2017. I don't feel like we've got enough control in place or accountability put on the consultants as they're delivering their cost estimates. You know, if we're owning that as the owner right now, and I think we have to transfer a bit of that risk to the consultant community we're working with. And Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts as a consultant on this call right now, Amber, you as well. But I think, you know, how do we as in transportation in Oregon make that shift to, it feels a little bit like we, the owner, are owning a bit too much of that in the moment when we're outsourcing so much of our portfolio by design, frankly, by legislative direction in terms of not upsizing the agency. So those are just a couple of things that were on my mind. And then I'd love to hear any thoughts around, I think we are striving to do better. You hear that from us. You've heard it multiple times when we've come before this committee. We'll always be in a place of continuous improvement in this. But how do we stack up nationally? Not from the tools we're using, not from the technical standpoint, but certainly we're not wanting to dial back our presence. We want to lean into this, but then how are we viewed kind of compared to others in the transportation sector? WashDOT was mentioned on the call earlier, but I just would love some perspective because I think we're striving to move harder into this place and do better, of course, but I think sometimes we need a little of that perspective of where do we fit in that kind of that spectrum of success, whether it's telling our story or just hitting cost estimating, whatever that measure is, doing it better. So those would be just some thoughts and also just a plug to see what others have to share.
Sharon,
Go ahead.
Sharon, my hand, the little thing, it's not working. I can push it.
Jump in, Ted.
Big question for Joe Wolf. Are these cost busts really happening in the big CMGC projects compared to the normal low bid rip read projects? Is that where the big differences are? Because you guys have always done really a pretty good job on estimating from what I've seen in the past. And until we got into the bigger projects, I think, is that where the deal is?
I think, yeah, our traditional STIP projects would do a pretty good job. We managing our STIP portfolio. You know, this recent issues with the materials and escalation and all that hit the whole portfolio, obviously. But we've reacted, we've adjusted. I think, yes, the larger projects, because they by nature draw more attention, they have more risk, they have more inputs, definitely influence the scope quite a bit, right? And so that's why you entertain that CMGC effort, right? You want to work with the contractor, you want to be able to be nimble, and you want to be able to be transparent as things are coming up. You want to be able to be, very iterative in the process because things are going to be coming at you. And again, those are value changes too. They're just not number changes, they're value changes that you're increasing the value of the project. Yes, it costs more, but we're doing all these other things too. So yeah, I don't know. There was maybe a couple of examples in that article that were maybe a more traditional STIP project. But when you dig into them, we added more lane miles of paving, right? We added more scope intentionally to the project. So it's just about that data point where he grabbed that number, right? But to your point and to your question, yes, it's the larger projects because they are getting more attention. They are having a larger impact to the community. And so there's way more interest into those. And that's good. But we need to be, and we're working the issue. I just think it's again, a communication thing. What value are we adding by adding this money? Yeah, we went from 750 to $1 billion. Well, what happened? What value did we give to the community for doing that? It's not that we're terrible cost estimators, right?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I know the complexity of the problem with a large project, and you bring in a team of contractors, designers, ICE estimators, and risk goes up, cost goes up, and it's almost impossible to figure out what that real dollar amount's going to be when you first get into the conception of one of those projects. So, you know, I realize what a battle it is. I'm not sure there's a real answer to get exactly where the dollars are going to be. I think you'd scare people. I did a lot of light rail around the country, and they always proposed them at about half the price of what they were really going to cost, and everybody knew that. Halfway through the project, they'd always run an article about how the contractor was creating change orders and charging more money, and that's why the cost went up. So we were always the bad guys, and everybody smiled, and it happened in every town we ever built in. So that's how it was handled by light rail for years. I think it's a tough job because each one of these big projects is so different than something else you've been building. It's going to be hard to really nail down the cost with all the people you have involved in looking at the project and everybody wanting changes. So if you think of the I-5 interstate bridge, when we were running through all the costs on that, every mayor wanted something. You know, the mayor of Vancouver wanted a top over the freeway so he could build a park, and that had to be thrown in. And they wanted cofferdams to quiet the sound down of putting in the drilled shafts, and it just was huge money. And when we looked at it, we could cut over $1 billion out, but politically it couldn't happen. So a lot of this is political dollars and people pushing what they can in and getting what they want. I think ODOT's taken a hit for something they really shouldn't be taking a hit for. My view.
Paula and then Amber.
Whenever CRC comes up, I like to remind people that that project would have been a lot less expensive 10 years ago when we were ready to build it. So I won't have my rant there. But I really applaud the comments you made, David, about how you're following national practices and learning as much as you can from the AASHTO community and federal highways, because some of those cost estimating great practices are emerging. Everybody's struggling with it. I would never let myself give a price for a complex project in the planning phase. The range of, you should always, I think, talk in series of ranges and then say why that's variability is there. And then the last thing is, Mac, when you mentioned reassigning risk to the consultants on estimating, I don't know how that works, but I think a rigorous review of how the consultants are doing estimating and that it passes muster in your review as an agency would really have to be the way that you do it. So it's not just, well, thank you for that estimate, consultant, we'll just turn around and bless it. I think you have to review what they've done and make sure it passes your gut check.
I will say this about the consultants. With AASHTO estimation, you have to be certified to use our program. So we are training. They don't even get access, and it's a deliverable until they go through our training. Now that's how to use the platform and the theory around it. What we alluded to earlier, David alluded to, is about the split function issues that we have with cost estimators in the regions. It's ultimately always been my opinion that it's our checkbook, right? And so we need to validate our checkbook and be able to provide that comment. But we need really good people that have the experience in the regions full time to look at every consultant cost estimate as if it was delivered through ODOT. And there's a difference right now. I'm telling you, that's a weakness we have, and we're trying to facilitate that. A lot of things that have come up here where we use the word engineer. I'm not an engineer. And, you know, I've been a lead cost estimator forever for big companies, and that's kind of the downfall in this realm. But there's opportunities there. And so I think that's one of the things we're trying to work on. It's a resource issue that I think we're looking to have people address.
So I just want to acknowledge the amount of change that ODOT has gone through in the last 5 years. I mean, the amount of change that ODOT has implemented is massive in a good way, in a very good way. I mean, you talked about the estimators, the 2 projects, IBR, the Rose Quarter. I mean, those are great changes for ODOT and the way that ODOT does work. So one question I'd love Paula to answer if she knows the answer, which is, do you know any performance-based engineering done by other agencies? And then I agree with Ted that, you know, ODOT is taking a hit for this, and it's not ODOT's to take, because I mean, and I'm speaking for myself as a community leader and someone that works with people of color and works with people that are underrepresented. A normal person would understand this, which is, we can't both put pressure on ODOT to have you listen to us and not expect that the scopes will change. That is the story. That's the story. And that's the story, Mac, that you need to get ODOT to help you tell. A normal person will understand that.
It's fascinating when I think about storytelling. I never thought in my career that's what I'd be focused on, is how do we do storytelling? There's some folks listening on this call that have heard this from me as we're talking about maintenance budget challenges, right? We've got a significant budget challenge hitting the agency over the next 4 years. And it's, we've been saying it for 10 years is coming, but we haven't figured out how to tell the story in the right way. So we're putting a lot of time and effort into that. And it's, you know, I think about some of the folks I grew up with, especially our tribal members, as I grew up in Eastern Oregon, right? We had a tribal summit last fall and talking about story and that culture, right? How do you tell a story? And I'm just fascinated thinking about, we're spending a lot of time in ODOT conversations right now talking about how do we tell our story in a way that people can understand without coming across defensive, of course, but it is a story. So anyway, I just appreciate those comments, Amber. It's showing up in a lot of places right now for us. And how do we take a very technical field of work and turn it into something that is easy to understand? I mean, maintenance is that other example right now of, you know, how do you convey why cleaning a culvert is so important to a road prison? As an example, well, much like in this conversation, right? All the depth of knowledge and focus that goes into estimating what a project may cost, whether it's a $200,000 improvement or a $200 million improvement. So anyway, sorry, I had to say that.
So I just want to pick up on, and I see Jaime has his hand up, so then I'll shut up. Mac, I would offer this one tiny little piece of advice, because we do strategic communications on complex policy, which is, sometimes I try and tell my clients, I need you to tell the story as though you're speaking to my daughter. Because then you will get out of your lingo, you'll get out of your techno speak, and you will say it in a way that everyone can understand. And that's your story.
You're here.
I love it. Thank you. what, I may jump in. Sorry for jumping right in top of the other big guy.
No, it's okay.
Oh, there he is.
So I manage the project controls office. I've been here for about 3 years, and I did come from the construction world. And I want to take us back to Amber's point in terms of the improvements that we have made. So I was involved in the US 20 Pioneer Mountain Eddyville project when ODOT took that project back in 2010. So when we look at alternative delivery versus standard delivery, our STIP portfolio, which most projects are in, on that Pioneer Mountain Eddyville project was a design build project, which we had done in the past. We just hadn't done it for a long time. And we didn't have the program set up that we have set up now and the staff to support alternative deliveries. So Zach's position, bringing Joe in with construction experience. But on that project, US 20 Pioneer Mountain Eddyville project, it was at the time ODOT's largest infrastructure improvement project since I-5 been built. And design build was chosen in my mind, and the teams that were involved in providing input on that position or on that delivery method. We really questioned it at the time, just based on the fact that we didn't have the information. Now we have the information. We have the teams that are established within the PCO. We have a lot of support in the regions. The training that Joe mentioned, we stood up when asked to where project estimation was coming on board. And we have what we're trying to establish as a project delivery section, and specifically in project controls office, is a minimum competency for all of ODOT estimators. So in that certification that Joe mentioned, we have an actual project that we provide where they anybody who wants a certification has to submit an exam, and we review it. And if they don't get the information correct, then we work with them. We want them to be successful. We want them to understand the estimating of where they potentially could improve, and then provide a test and get a second chance. And then only then are they given this certification statewide. So I've heard a lot of great comments in terms of the estimating that ODOT is doing, how we're doing it. And it might be a chance to take a step back in the communication piece and how we tell the story that we're talking about. And the 5 or 6 projects that have been coming out in the media, those are all mega projects that have been built. And it might be valuable to separate our standard estimating that we do on our 90% of our portfolio versus 10% of mega projects, understanding that the mega projects have a really, really high construction estimate and construction costs typically. So we're going to find those items that are going to be change orders or scope changes that are going to be included in those mega projects, which happen on the smaller projects as well. They're just not as impactful, and they're not going to make the front page of the Oregonian or other newspapers. So moving forward, as I talk to the estimators, that we talk to the regions, talk to David, Tamara, the next step in minimum competency for us is to make sure that at the very start of projects, at the project initiation stage, as was mentioned, that we actually get all our designers that are engineers or that are working towards an engineering degree or certification as a professional engineer. We have designers that aren't engineers, but all of those people combined have to have that minimum competency I'm talking about to use AstroWare project estimation, because that's where really we're going to get the best benefit, to make sure that we're, as an agency, we're being consistent in estimating, and we're using the same tools and we're using the same databases. And traditionally that hasn't been the case. So that's what I would offer to the group is, in MAC, as we have a new communications person, Bobby, helping us, is maybe look at it through that lens of the big projects are in the news, but then how are we doing with a standard STIP portfolio? And we're doing pretty darn good on estimating there, but that's something that's just not
out there, the message that the public gets is not, is only on the mega projects. So all those things combined, appreciate everybody's input, but we are working towards that improvement. And I think we're going to have to start with the minimum competencies to get our ODOT internal people there with oversight with the consultants as well.
Amber?
Well, maybe the story is, I mean, and I really want to think about what the story is, because I really care about some of the things that are, some of these projects, they're vital for the economy. So maybe the story is looking at the STIP projects and the fact that there's like practically no cost overruns or something like that. And then the other part of the story is ODOT's listening. And so it's a juxtaposition between because the question that's being asked here is ODOT's credibility with regard to this. And that's not real. And you can show that it's not real. And you can also show, and we are listening, and the result of that listening affects scope. And that effect on scope is going to affect budget. But I'm just going to say this one more time, Mac. It needs to be done from a human, it needs to be written from a human perspective, which means you have to put a human face on that story. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm shutting up now.
No, Amber, it's great. I wish you could see the chat streams that are going on right now about this conversation, because frankly, it's a bit empowering, I think, to some conversations we've been having internally already around the people-focused messaging and how we share our story. So, Amber, I think you're speaking to the choir for some other folks that are engaged in this conversation that may not be on the screen right now. So thank you.
Well, I knew there would be a lot of meat on these topics, and we had 3 for today, and we are at 2:10. So I would suggest if we move to the second one and get through as much of that as we can, and then maybe talk about bringing you all back.
Great. So I'll continue on with the presentation, and I think just the having our cost estimating team here gives us all insight to the caliber of the employees that we have. It was mentioned earlier, creating an A team. We have an A team. So much of what we just talked about, my thunder has been stolen, because the next piece of this is, to think and hold a project to a single cost estimate is an unreasonable expectation to manage. Cost estimates are dynamic, and in the world of transportation, we see this play out with projects taking years to go from planning to construction closeout. It's important to stress that for each project, there are numerous cost estimates. As more information and design is known, the first bullet identifies a series of variables that contribute to dynamic cost estimates. And when we're in the world of planning, and we look at costs, we have a set of known knowns. We also have a set of known unknowns, which would be characterized through risk or assumptions. And then we have some or many unknown unknowns. And as we get into design and we get more resources to those projects, as we progress from planning to project development to bid, we're striving to maximize the known knowns with bid items. We manage the known unknowns through risk registers, risk profiles, and contingencies. And then we try to address the unknown unknowns through a very small contingency. We hopefully get down to like a 3.5%. And then we apply the tools and programs and delivery methods to manage those costs. Much of the focus on cost estimating has been on our STIP, from scoping through construction. However, cost estimating for major projects really begins in planning. And this is playing out right now. Joe mentioned the I-5 widening project, and we have another project, the I-5 Boone Bridge project. And I want to turn it over to Megan and Amy to just briefly speak to our cost estimating approach for the Boone Bridge project.
Thanks, David. And so for Boone Bridge, here we are kicking off a project with the planning phase in progress. And I think, as we reflect back on not only just our urban mobility office projects and our lessons learned, from Rose Quarter and the 205 projects, we also look at our broader STIP projects and what did we learn? And now that we're sort of starting in the infancy phase here for Boone Bridge, what can we carry forward? And so with this, we're leveraging a lot of those different kind of steps for price accuracy, bringing in different tools. So again, being able to utilize our cost estimating template, and then leaning on independent cost estimating upfront in the design phase as well. Again, we are very early in the planning phases. There's a lot more design work to be done. Shana, I can't help but think of your comments here on this is when we do these estimates, this is where we're going to have a lot of those caveats because we are upfront. And Amber, I can't help but reflect on a lot of your comments, with the engagement that's to come as well. How do we make sure that story is told as we engage the public in making the Boone Bridge project the project that is meeting our community values? So all of that will have to be in. But and then as we look towards, as we're in the design phase as well, looking towards making sure that we have broad industry input into our process too. So in the spirit of caveating, we're still in the planning phase. We're starting off here. We haven't even yet selected the delivery method for this approach too, which will also affect kind of how and who we can include in our estimating process as well. But just wanted to highlight that this is an opportunity for us to kind of lean in early and get a lot of those lessons learned from the good, the bad, the ugly of the past, and making this better as we go forward. So I will pause there. David, I think I'm turning it back to you kind of for some question prompts. And I am joined by Amy Jones. If there's questions about Boone Bridge, she can help answer those as well.
I do know that one of the big lessons learned is that we know that individuals that have that construction experience bring a very robust cost estimating approach to developing estimates. And for the Boone Bridge project, I know the Urban Mobility Office is actually bringing in estimators that have that construction experience to bring that into planning. So then I'll just jump to the next slide, which we've talked about some of these points. We've talked about transparency and accountability and some of the improvement initiatives that we've implemented or are now playing out. Standards of practice are in place, documentation and reporting, as we've never done this before to this level, and we're very rich in data. And it's going to still take us some time to capture more of that data into our systems. We still have documents that are in PDF that we're trying to translate into metadata that can be sliced and diced in various different ways for analysis. Yet project cost estimate discussions often compare planning and scoping estimates to final construction costs, much of the conversation we just had. And then for mega projects, we're focused on now, how do we infuse some of the tools that we have developed from, say, the scoping phase or development phase into the planning realm? And then recognizing that these projects do take a long, long time. And so the question is, what can ODOT do to promote cost estimating as a dynamic rather than static work effort?
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Is it all right if I
Go right ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think that it needs to be really clear to everyone you're communicating with that cost estimating is a process, and it kind of ends when the project is fully implemented, is fully constructed. And maybe we need to think about cost estimating more, as you said, as dynamic and process oriented as opposed to the act itself. And I'm struck by what Amber said about community engagement will result in scope change, and that will result in budget impacts. And so the idea that you would have an estimate and then go into community engagement and expect that estimate to not change. And so maybe it's one of words and narrative, but you know, again, it comes back to this telling the story. One thing that somebody taught me once that really sticks with me is when you are communicating about a project or about anything, like level setting immediately, taking a minute, 2 minutes at the top of any meeting, any conversation you're having, and talking about what it is you're doing, what it is you're, and in this case, boiling down what cost estimating is at the front of any conversation, what it is and what it isn't, is really important. And so I think maybe moving towards language more about cost estimating as a process. It's not the goal. Cost estimating includes many, many variables that are subject to change at any given time. I'm really struck by the barrier example. One example is X, that changed the cost to Y. And here is where we are in the cost estimating process, like really being clear with whoever you're communicating with. So that's kind of how I think about it, as opposed to, I think maybe the way we previously were talking about it was, we have a project, we want to know how much it's going to cost, we want to estimate the cost, and then we want to do the project. But I think it's a lot more fluid and grayer.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sitting here racking my brain trying to come up with an analogy, like a simple analogy, because like even the word planning, scoping, blah, 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 like like we want to break that down into an analogy that shows a iterative process that results in a product. And so what are those planning, scoping, blah, blah, blah? What would be an analogy that you could explain this process through an analogy that a normal person would understand what the heck that means? That's the question. I'm trying to think of one. I'll come up with one and I'll send it to somebody.
You know, the only thing that comes to my mind is when you're planning a family vacation, like, let's go to the coast for a week. Well, how much is that going to cost?
That's a good one. I actually really like that one. Because
little Johnny wants to go to the sand dunes. And, you know, we got to get a parking pass fee. And Susie wants to go to the aquarium. Well, we're going to have to buy tickets. And I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of is we have a budget, but is that really, you know, is that going to be enough once we get all of everybody's input? And then, my gosh, gas prices just doubled. So it's going to cost more. And now the hotel has raised their prices. So that's all I got.
On a holiday weekend.
You know, one of you mentioned Amber and Shanna are such good communicators. I think that's the crux of all of this, and having some sort of a graphical image that you show 1,000 times to legislators, or, you know, it's one, that's why I like, David, that triangle that says, you know, when you start up, I don't know where I am on, when you start a project, your range is so wide because of all the variables. And as you get towards construction, you know, these cost estimates converge. But using something that people can imagine that, well, that makes sense. There's so many unknowns right out of the gate as you're imagining or developing a project. Of course, there must be ranges, and all these things in the middle are decisions made and policies that you're implementing and all of those kinds of things that get you the outcome you're desiring.
Maybe it's building a house. I mean, because that's a little bit more like.
I agree. Something. I think it's building a house.
And you have dry rot that you don't know about.
Yeah.
And you found out the ground needs helical piers for foundation.
Yeah, and those tiles were asbestos, and the lead paint needs to be remediated, and like you open the walls and the plumbing's from 1902 or whatever. I think a house project like that is a very tangible way for regular people to understand how cost can change. And that's really what you're trying to communicate. And why the first cost is, I think of it as like order of magnitude, but we're going to see shifts. And I always joke around, I'm like the guy from Office Space who's like, I'm good with people, darn it, can't you see I'm good with people?
I'm a people person.
I'm a people person. I talk to the customers so the engineers don't have to. It's like literally what I do for a living.
I know personally, I've used the house analogy in meetings at ODOT. I think for us, we know what our problems are with the house. It's more about, we need to replace that roof in 5 years, but we're going to say the roof costs X now and plan for it. But when it comes to be replaced, now the roof costs something else, or that roof no longer is warranted, or those types of things. And I think another analogy is for us, white pavement versus traditional asphalt pavement. We could put that roof on with traditional shingles, or we could spend a few more $1 million and we not have to touch that roof for 60 years or 70 years, right? So those are the types of things that I think we work with. And the house analogy does work even in ODOT meetings with our engineers when we talk about planning. So I've used that one quite a bit.
The other thing I'm wondering is, you've got a great project estimating team centrally. Are you training folks in the regions on the ground? You know, are we breaking down the silo to make sure that it becomes embedded in our culture?
So we are, us estimators, and I have no qualms with management structure or anything, but we're us estimators that do the work. We're established peer groups with just people that do the work. So we have monthly peer group meetings now that that deal with just the regional people, and we discuss policy or issues or other things that may be going on with the rest of our portfolio. And we also have monthly estimation user groups, which is all the consultants, everybody we've trained monthly are invited to a meeting, and we keep it really short. We have topics we talk about at the market, updates we're doing to the platform, issues that they have. And so between those two, one, we're trying to just say, hey, we're not just central, we're a part of you, we're an extension of you. Here's your voice. Here's the things we see from our side. Here's the things you say from your side. How can we steer this together, right? And then we take that to the larger group to discuss with the larger group. Structurally, I still think we have room to grow on the regional side, just to get dedicated cost estimators, to get that functionality as the core part of that discipline. And I think we're working towards that as we discuss the discipline. We're working on the culture right now, which is, you know, when I started here at ODOT, it was very much region versus headquarters, right? And we didn't talk much, and we talk a lot now, daily. Our group is talking with the people that are boots on the ground, doing the work. What are you seeing? Because we see projects on a weekly basis. We're bidding weekly. You take somebody out in the region, maybe they have a project that bids only once every 2 months, right? And so we're trying to translate, what are we seeing in the market, what things to look out for, how do we structure an estimate to get the best value for the project. So those things are happening to build the culture, and then we're going to need some adjustments structurally, I think, at some point to really make some gains.
Yeah, Amber, then Tamara.
So one of the things you said, Chair Smith, that I'll pick up on is embedding this in the culture. And the thing that strikes me is that, and I say, if hopefully Mac is still on, yeah, there he is. So I say this with absolute fondness and love for ODOT, which is, these big projects are really campaigns. We need to think of these as campaigns. And the thing is they can affect how the public sees ODOT, even though, you know, they're entirely different beasts. But I say that because anything that core messages like this is a core message that ODOT can continuously put out around this storytelling around whatever the analogy is that you come up with. I would put it out all the time, frequently, on all the mega projects, and it would be part of ODOT's core messaging, because it can impact all of ODOT, how it's perceived in its governance, which is not real.
Go ahead, Tamara.
Thank you. So trying to sum up for this topic, we talked about we do recognize that ODOT could do more in some basic training and certifications. Part of that should be whenever anyone mentions an estimate, they need to qualify it by what point in the process is that estimate. Are you talking about something that's just beginning at planning, or are you well into development or about to put it out to bid? So qualifications. But I'm also wondering, I am very visual. I love graphics, and I really like the idea of a common graphic that we show all the time. And I'm wondering if we can incorporate that into some online training that we could provide to anyone through the web. That gives just some basic structural understanding of how cost estimating for a transportation project is a journey, and uses some basic graphics, and that, you know, whenever we talk about a cost estimate, we're going to be bringing a narrative and telling the story.
You know, you could create a graphic of a house going from just a schematic plan, you know, with 2,400 square feet, and then the next phase, where how much land you have, and maybe there's some materials on the outside, and then finally, you know what all the finishes are on the inside. So I don't know, you could probably come up with a graphic for each stage of your estimating.
I think that's a great idea. I really love the idea. I'm like craving like a 30-second or 60-second spot that gets pinned on all of your social media channels, and that you start every presentation with, that says like, cost estimating is really complicated. Here's an example, and you have really cool graphics. And I would put money on the fact that there's probably something on the interwebs that already that we can borrow, copyright, whatever it is, but that we say like, cost estimating is really complicated. Here's why, here's how it works. Let's boil it down to something that everyday people can understand. You're redoing your bathroom, like here's what it looks like. And you just have to, and I just think that's a really good idea. And I think it's really important also for folks at ODOT to start adopting that in every presentation that they're doing, every time they're talking about cost estimating, particularly if it's with a legislator or the media.
Yeah, and don't be shy about making it funny.
Yes, make it funny and appealing,
funny.
like
Exactly.
Definitely, 100%.
It could be one of those animations where somebody's drawing it up and they're talking about how you build a house, and how you subcontractors, and you see this
Something
image that
goes
progresses from
sideways.
a
Exactly.
land to a building. And I know we're at time. Maybe what we can do is if we're going to have follow-up conversations, maybe we can have the team start putting a sketch together of a house, and just maybe share that and get feedback at the next meeting. We did have 2 more slides which relate to just an update on the market conditions and how that's affecting our estimates today, and we can cover that next time as well. I
think that's great, David. I'd love for that. And maybe we can invite somebody from our communications team so that we can kind of work together. And I'll work with Sabrina and the team to see if next month, you know, if the next meeting works. And then we'll update everybody on the committee for next project, next meeting projects. And any final comments or thoughts before we, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Just real quick, I just want to say thank you to the other members of the committee, as well as to the ODOT staff that joined today. I think frankly, as I think about this group, it's such a different construct. And I think the legislature envisioned that when they created the concept of this committee in House Bill 2017. And I just want to say thank you, because I think sometimes it can feel a bit of an awkward place, no matter what topic we're having, right? We're used to giving presentations, engaging, but this has really turned into sort of thoughtful discussion and dialogue around how do we do this together. So I just want to say thank you. I think it's a pretty powerful conversation today, and one that frankly I think we're already starting to talk about. So this isn't new to us, but I think it's given us some powerful takeaways for how we really make it happen in a short period of time. This is not over the next 6 months we do something. This is much more front and center to us now than it ever has been. So I just want to say thank you. And Commissioner Smith, thank you for your leadership and in creating a forum that feels different than other places that we do this.
Thank you. And I will tell you that it's been a bit of a push and pull, because we wanted to get away from ODOT making a presentation and us listening. And I think the value in this committee, you know, are the folks at the table who can look at things differently and brainstorm. And that's really the goal here. And I thank everybody on the committee, because you guys have the best ideas.
There were a lot of gold nuggets today that we're going to take away and really digest. And the one fact that I really appreciate about the conversation today is it's one ODOT. We're not us, them. It's not Urban Mobility, IBR. It's one ODOT. We're focused on the interests of the agency moving ahead. And definitely a major theme about communication and the narrative and telling the story was huge takeaway for us. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for a good meeting today, and we will see you next time.